Oh, dear. Okay, we are re-adjourning this meeting. It's the council meeting of the Thursday, the 28th of November, 2024. And we are up to, after a little bit of a shuffle in the agenda, item 11.2, local purpose road reserve to be dedicated as a road. Earlier today we had quite a long public speaking time session around this and had the opportunity to ask a lot of questions. I'll pass to Sean or Darren. Darren, Chief Executive.
Thanks, Your Worship. You've got Sean, Gina and I to introduce this report for you. So after several workshops and much debate, you've got this report in front of you today for a decision. I'd just like to remind you what the decision is that we are asking of you today. It's not to relitigate a resource consent that has been issued by central government through the fast track process, as we have no jurisdiction over that decision. But what you do have is the ability to make the decision in relation to the piece of reserve that is for road. And so that's what we'll be asking you to consider this morning. So it's really important that I ask you to keep that at the front of your minds. Now, we had a question earlier this morning in relation to judicial review, and if that's an option. I'd certainly say no, that's not an option. That's more of a whack on the hand from the judicial system if we decide to make a decision and someone challenges that decision. All that process can do is decide on a fact of law, whether we were right as a council to make a decision or not. They don't then overturn the decision, but they send it back to you to make a decision. They can't change the resource consent because that hasn't been appealed. I'm not saying that your decision will be appealed, but if it is, that's what the court will consider. So the resource consent has been issued. You've quite clearly heard that, and that's outlined in your papers. So I'm going to take the report as read. I'm going to ask Sean if he has any comments that he would like to add, and then Gina before we pass it to you for questions. So thank you.
So good afternoon. Thank you, Darren. So there were a couple of questions on some statements made this morning in the public speaking section of the meeting that I think require a response. And there was a question, I think, from a councillor, Halliday, around limited access requirement. Yeah, so so there's a few things there I can respond to. I guess one of the issues that was raised is the Safe Systems report that council did commission, and there was a comment from the gallery that asked why did council commission this report. Nobody had asked for that report, and why, and that was unusual for us to have done that work. So that report was commissioned after meeting with Monique Leith and Harriet Fraser, who were representing the community at that stage, and I believe continue to represent them to some extent up through to the hearing. So Harriet was their transport expert, and Monique was providing planning advice through Leith Consultancy to that group. So at the request of both of those people, and after them providing us input into that report, we commissioned that report, and yes, council funded it. And one of the reasons why we did that was obviously there was a lot of community concern around safety, around access, around why the alternative or an alternative around accessing onto the state highway rather than SUAV wasn't being pursued. And that Safe Systems report, and there was also a reference to the scoring that was used in that report, is a standardised approach for assessing safety with regard to the transport sector. So there's a set criteria how you rank those elements, and it's there. And we use the same process. I believe we did actually use the same process with regard to Poplar and the crossing that was there. That we ended up there. We had Tonkin Taylor, I think, did a similar structured report on what was the safer option to provide, and so that's exactly what was done. And no, we would not normally do that. We don't normally. An applicant comes in, if they put in for a resource consent, we will ask for further information, and we would potentially ask them to do that work. But because this process was being run through the EPA, and we weren't able to instruct the applicant to do extra work, we could raise issues, which we did, but there's no guarantee then that the commissioners or that process would instruct the applicant to go away and do that work. So because of that risk, because of the concern, we commissioned the work, but it was initiated by that group, not by council. So we didn't offer and start that process. It was suggested that we do that, and we said, yeah, okay, we're happy to do that. So it talks to that in the paper. I'm not sure what the paragraph is, but again, it was referenced, and there's emails available that clearly sets out why we did that work, and so that's that report. And the other, So 10.1 talks about that, the engagement process. So I met multiple times with Harriet and Monique and some residents as well at the first meeting. But the other issue that came up was the ability to connect to the highway. And I think the comment was that the LAR is a limited access road. It's a designation from a planning perspective that sits over most of the state highway network. So it's similar to a designation that we would have in the district plan over the landfill. So it's designated as a landfill. That means you can undertake certain activities in there. Gives you sort of right of veto over for other activities as well. So, and this section of the state highway, for some reason, does not have is not a limited access road. Doesn't have that designation. Now that was never, I assume, was never actually asked for or never applied for whatever reason. It's NZTA process. The rest of the state highway back through the district that we revoked has that LAR status. This section of the highway doesn't. But it does not change the fact that that is owned by the Crown. It is still state highway. Regardless of that LAR status, you still have to get permission from NZTA to obviously connect to that network. It's theirs, and so that provision will stay in place for at least the next 2 years until the revocation work's completed, and then there's a process by which, as we've done with Mackay to Pika Pika, they write to the minister and then they uplift that designation. So it remains NZTA's, it remains a state highway. There is a period of time yet to pass before it would be vested back to council. And so I think, as Cuttress mentioned, that you could not provide that connection without getting NZTA to sign it off and approve it. The other question, there were some other references raised, I guess, in terms of the alternative and consideration for there were some references to who was and wasn't aware of information. So from a council perspective, there's no new information that's been tabled, nothing that we're aware of that wasn't tabled through the consenting process, hasn't already been considered as part of that traffic assessment work and those traffic experts who have already spent a fair bit of time and effort reviewing the proposal and the Safe Systems audit, looked at the state highway option and looked at the SUAV option and determined that the SUAV option was the best, was the safest of those options. And even if you at a 50 kilometre an hour speed or a 70 kilometre an hour speed, they still retained that recommendation. So again, and there was some references to NZTA not knowing what modelling was used or when that modelling was taken account of and whether it was with the expressway closed or open. That's not an issue in terms of the level of comfort with the recommendations that have come through from the independent peer review or board, the consent and anything else that was raised today. So basically, without any further information or new information or nothing that's actually changed, the decision, if the applicant was to relodge and suggest that they'd like to use the state highway, our response to that would be, well, no, we prefer the Sue Ave Moy Place as the primary point of connection. So even if they went through another consenting process, they'd still get the same answer. The recommendation from staff would be the same. Those issues around safety, and if you read the evidence and read the responses from the Board of Inquiry, all of those are mitigated. Again, it was well traversed and discussed through the hearing. There was comments around staff providing advice, I think, early on, which is what we do with any individual developer. Anyone that comes into the organisation is looking for advice, both whether it's water, wastewater, transport, traffic. We're obliged, we're there to give that advice and inform them as to what would be our preferred option. And there was comments around transport strategy, and again, I think Nick mentioned it. Keeping your main primary network free of connections, whether it's roading, water, wastewater, electricity, you try to minimise the points that you actually cut into that network, because it provides extra cost, it also provides for extra risk, it also introduces those weak points to your network. So we would always look to try and minimise that and suggest, if you've got an option there that's available, it can be, or it's safe and it's usable and provides for traffic, then that would be the advice we'd give to the applicant. And again, if they came back in tomorrow and presented the same information and asked for advice, or presented the access onto the state highway, we'd say, well, no, our preference is that you use Sue Ave and Moy Place. So that's the decision that was made through the transport section. And then if you read the evidence, it also talks in there that was supported by at least the expert that the panel had in terms of their view. And I think that was all of the questions really from this morning.
Any other questions? Liz?
Yeah, so just to be really, really clear, what you're telling us is there is no way for residents in Moy Place to achieve their desired outcome, realistically.
Not that I'm aware of that requires approval both from NZTA, approval from council, and would require, whether it's a variation or whatever it might be, to the consent. If it has to go through a traffic assessment, then the assessment would provide the same outcome in terms of Sue Ave, Moy Place being the preferred point of access.
Right, so you're agreeing with what I'm saying, that
Yes.
there is really no way of them achieving that outcome.
I don't believe, from a transport perspective, that would be an outcome that you would get if you went back down through the same process again.
So I mean, from where I see things, a developer would have to have rocks in their head to vary their consent. So even if they did suddenly have rocks on their head and varied it to come off
Straight
State
on.
Highway 1, it's still not going to go anywhere.
We'd still come back and say, no, we don't. That's not that's less safe than Moy and Sue Ave. So why would we support that from a transport perspective?
Yeah, so it's a done deal, really. We're in a corner, and
Yeah, they have a
that's
consent.
just how it is. Yeah, they have a consent.
That consent considered traffic. There was a lot of work that went into the traffic element to it. There was extra work that you wouldn't necessarily have had that council provided in terms of reviewing alternatives, the state highway or the Sue Ave. So more information than you would necessarily normally have to assess that application. And through that process with the relevant experts involved, they came to the decision that that was the best outcome. Well, they supported that provision through Sue Ave.
And if we don't agree to the road, it's quite likely it would go to judicial review, and that doesn't bring in other alternatives. All it does is send it back to council if they think we haven't made the right decision.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, it wouldn't examine the.
Wouldn't examine the
consenting.
State Highway 1 option.
No, it was purely around the decision-making process to get to that point.
That's right.
So,
Yep, thank you.
Rob?
Oh, thank you. Just a quick one, Sean. The EPA have said that access to the site during construction will be off the main road, yeah?
That's right. I think that's one of their conditions.
Were Transit consulted?
In terms of that condition, I don't know. I wasn't part of the
Thank you.
the hearing process, but to get access, they need NZTA's approval.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more lights, so I'm going to move the recommendations A through D on page 21. Do I have a seconder?
Can I put a procedural
Do I have a
motion?
seconder? I'm moving the recommendation to seconded by Councillor Spires. Right of introduction. Oh, sorry, Shelley's light's on.
I wanted to move a procedural motion. Different motion.
Okay, Shelley's moving a procedural motion. Do you want to outline that?
That the item of business being discussed, which is 11.2 dedicated local road reserve as road, be adjourned to the council meeting on Thursday the 12th of December at 9:30 a.m.
Do I have a seconder for that? Okay, as that's a procedural motion, there's no debate. So I'll put that to the vote. All in favour? All in favour? Against? No.
Who was online though?
Okay, so we have Sophie and Jocelyn online. Sophie is in favour, Jocelyn is in favour. So I think we need a division. So Sophie, you're in favour of the procedural motion to defer. Have I got that right? Yes. Okay. So in favour, please put your hands up. So we have Councillor Warwick. She's in favour.
Councillor
Warwick.
Councillor Coford, Councillor Cooper. And online we have Councillor Hanford and Councillor Bravana.
Against?
And those against. So against I have, Your Worship.
Is
Deputy
Nigel
Mayor,
online? Is Nigel online?
No.
Okay.
Councillor Halliday, Councillor Coe, Councillor Spires. So it's 5-5. So, Your Worship, you have the deciding vote.
So I won't exercise my deciding vote, which means that we retain the status quo, which is that we carry on with the debate. Does that make sense? Yep. Cool. So I will go on with my right of introduction. So the reason I voted, first of all, now that I'm in debate and why I think we should decide this today. So we have had extensive briefings on this. We've carried out consultation with the residents. They have come into these chambers twice already to state their case, and we've given them our ear, our questions, and all due consideration. It's not an easy decision, but waiting isn't going to make it any easier. And I think the sooner people have some certainty around this, the better. I think it's pretty clear how this needs to go. We already have the resource consent in place. We just now have a procedural decision that we need to make. And it's a tough one. And I particularly feel for the local councillors who've been lobbied by local residents who don't want their lifestyle to change, and that's completely understandable. But we have traffic assessments and a resource consent which tells us that this is the safest option for access to this development. So now we just need to do this final step so that the development can go ahead. The alternative is that we don't make this happen today and potentially we go to a judicial review. Now, that is not a good place to be in. First and foremost, because it's going to cost us some hundreds of thousands of dollars as a council in a time when we are trying to look after our ratepayers and save money. And let's make no bones about it. After that, in all likelihood, this decision will land on our table to make again. In the meantime, we'll have a delay to the development. We'll have residents who are still living with uncertainty. And then we'll probably make the decision that I'm suggesting that we make today. We can put it off and put it off, but what is outlined in these recommendations is what needs to happen. And I feel for the residents, I really do. It's not easy when your environment changes and your life changes. But we'll work with the developers to make sure that that road is as safe as it can be. I'll push to fence that playground if we need to. We've already fenced a playground in Harry Shaw Way. We'll do our utmost to keep the community safe. And once this is finished, I think it's going to be okay, actually, for those people. In my time as an elected member over about 18 years, I've been through this before, where I'm sitting in a room and people think their lives are being ruined by something that's going to change in their communities. And it's hard to witness. And it's hard to make the decision that's going to make that thing happen. But generally what happens afterwards is everything's actually okay. So let's just make this good governance decision today, complete the final step in this process so that these developers can create some housing in Otaki, which is so desperately needed. Okay, so I have some other lights on. Liz?
Look, I think there's an inevitability about this decision that we're confronted with today, and it's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. For me, I cannot see a way forward to any different outcome, and I've tested that with Sean, who's confirmed that. I think it would be very difficult to see any different outcome. I think also we need to take into account that there's a number of different stakeholders involved in this decision. There's the people who are potentially going to be living in those 134 houses, which might be, 200 or 300 people. They have a vested interest in this. We don't know who they are yet, but they want to see this development go ahead, I'm sure. We have the rest of the community to consider. We have, the shortage of housing in Otaki to consider. Yes, there are people affected by this, and that is really, really sad. I commend the local councillors and community board people who have done their absolute best to support the residents of Moy Place. It's been an emotionally charged situation, but I think the reality is we have to put emotion aside, and the law has no empathy at all. Sometimes the law is cruel, but it is the law, and we have to stick to that. If someone has a legal entitlement to do something, we can't stand in their way. We can't use the road access as a backdoor way of undoing the consent. And I think that's what has been coming through to me, is that people are trying to use the road as a way to do that, to undo the consent. The consent is in place. We don't have the power to change that. And we need to be sensible about this. We've heard from the developers that they have no appetite for changing the consent, and I don't blame them for that at all. That's the most sensible decision on their part. If we say no to this road, it is quite likely it will go to judicial review, because again, that would be a very sensible decision on the part of the developer. It's only going to lead to more pain, more cost, more uncertainty. And it's just, it's not the outcome that many of us want, but it is the reality, and we have to face up to reality. I am going to vote in support of creating the road in this instance. So, I just see no other way to do things cleanly and effectively with the least amount of pain and uncertainty. Thank you.
Shelley? Councillor Warwick?
Firstly, the residents are not against the development.
No,
Yeah.
that's right.
And I'm not against the development. Yes, we need housing, but I think that we're getting developers who come in here and say they're doing something for the community, but they're doing something to line their pockets at the end of the day, to be frank. They're not doing it for a community good. And I just think from this process we have to learn some lessons. There was actually really late consultation with the residents who would be affected, both by council, it seems, and by Cuttress, who rang on Monday to make an appointment to mediate or discuss this with residents, which is actually just a slap in the face to the residents, I believe. And Plan Change 2 has made historic decisions, like the one that was to make this a road reserve, different now. Yes, it was decided in 2007 or 2008 when the landscape was quite different. And I just hope that, we do actually, yes, fast track consenting is a thing and it's a pain in the neck, but we need to actually consider the community that we're affecting. And they were never opposed to the amount of houses or the planned development. It was just what the impact it was going to be on their community and their street, which I think is actually true.
Bede?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a quick comment on a comment there. Just wanted to say that the law can definitely be empathetic. It should be dispassionate, but definitely can be empathetic. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I'd just emphasise that too. The law is based on justice. It's not, law isn't based on anything other than justice, actually. It's supposed to be what it's about. Anyway, I think it's nonsense to suggest that somehow this development is a community good. It isn't. And the idea that somehow these extra houses are what's going to save the housing crisis, by the numbers, actually there will be a significant oversupply. But leaving any of that aside, the residents don't oppose the development at all. They're completely fine with the development. There is an alternative. I read the traffic management report just 2 days ago, or yesterday even, we got it quite late in the piece. That's a very persuasive document. I personally think this goes to judicial review. I think we lose. But as a former hearing commissioner, I've looked at that. If I was sitting on that commission, I would think the applicants, who, if this passes, the applicants will be the residents. And everyone's working on the theory that the residents won't have enough money to do it, and so therefore they'll just roll over. But fundamentally, when it comes down to these sorts of decisions, and I've said this before, you have a moral choice. That's what it comes down to. To me, it is morally wrong to massively disaffect an existing community in favour of the development of a new one when there is a viable alternative. Now, there is a viable alternative. It's just one that the developer doesn't want to use. For obvious reasons, they can maximise their profit by not doing that. But there is a viable alternative. For us to suggest that there isn't, and if you want to go back to the history of when Alan Milne was the mayor and the senior partner of Cuttress Consultants, when this decision was made, the arrangements back then were significantly different than what they are now. But that's an argument, that might be an argument about the development itself and the resource consent, but that's not what we're here. It's about that road reserve. And if at the time when the really clever people around this table were making that decision and they had heard actually there might be 139 houses there, would they then have said, well, yeah, actually let's make that a road reserve at some stage. That'll be, these people over here are going to really love that. So town planners at the time would have said, actually, that doesn't make any sense. You just come off the highway. It's not a highway anymore anyway. So there's so much that's changed. Any judge, any panel sitting there is going to factor all that in. I couldn't possibly vote for this when there's a viable alternative.
Martin.
Through you, Madam Chair. Rules, 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 rules. It's always comes down to this, doesn't it? The rub between rules and governance when it comes to this sort of level. And we are at the governance level, local governance level, and we need to take a wider view for our community. That's, in my opinion, that's what we're here for. My measure's always been what's fair and reasonable. And that, in my opinion, is one of our elected responsibilities to our community. But it has to be balanced with rules, and that can be the tricky bit. Firstly, though, I want to acknowledge Shelley as the local ward councillor there and the work that she's done tirelessly with regards to advocacy in this space. And I think, Shelley, you're an example to us all with regards to what a ward councillor should be doing in this space. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. I know you've had support from Rob as well, but you as ward councillor there, you've really gone to bat right up to the last minute. Yeah, I just wanted to salute you for that. This has gone through a hugely robust process that is very, very rule-based. So when does discretion come in? Who knows? As noted by Cuttress, this has been the most scrutinised plan through planning that they have ever been involved with. And I appreciate what Councillor Wilson was saying about being challenged in this space. I was certainly challenged by the report that came through. But that's not the report. That's one of many reports in this space. And one thing I've certainly learned is that reports can be made, I shouldn't say be made, that's the wrong thing to say. But depending on who's commissioning a report, the outcome of the report can be different as such. And it's a bit like that with finances as well. That's why we dig into this stuff. This is why we read up on this stuff. And we have, I'd have to say, considering the scope of the situation, especially what we're voting on today, which is just a reserve, the amount of information that's been amassed in this space is just phenomenal. I think it's a shame that the proposed meeting didn't happen and that this wasn't addressed in a more proactive manner by those concerned. Also that the community group turned down the invite on Tuesday, which would have been interesting to see how that went, and I think would have been pertinent potentially to this conversation, but we'll never know that now. I don't see another pathway here other than what is being proposed. Because at the end of the day, if this is reviewed, this is a very, very, when you shake it all down, what decision making today is a very, very simple one. It's a road reserve. It's designated as a road reserve. It was put there as a road reserve, and all we're doing now is fulfilling the end result, which is turning that road reserve into the road for the reason it was put there. That's our decision. I would like to look at the wider then have some robust discussion about this. But by crikey, Charlie, it's gone through 2 years of that process. When does it stop? My heart goes out to people, the residents that are there. We have to make a decision around the information that's in front of us. And so I'm prepared to make that decision. From my perspective, I'll be supporting the motion as we move forward, as I think the consequence will cost this council significantly, both reputational damage and financially. Potentially we can take on board the changes, but having been in a similar situation myself recently with revocation down here, I was trying to align that with that situation. I don't think it does. I don't think there's a discretion element here that can really be utilised or taken advantage of to make this situation any different than the outcome that's being proposed. So I'll be supporting as we move forward.
Rob?
Oh, thanks, Janet. There are more questions there than comments, I think. What we've heard today is some pretty irrelevant stuff, but we have had reference to the EPA coming up with a determination, and it's been referred to as a resource consent, but their instructions said that it depends on the council deciding what happens with that reserve land, that reserve road land. Also, we've had comments that they won't take, transit won't allow any access off the main road there. Yet the EPA says you will use the access off the main road. They've overridden the actual applicant who didn't have a access off the main road, and they saw, well, that's a load of nonsense. We'll make them use the main road for the construction. So they've actually admitted the main road is the access way. They couldn't actually go further and say that's the permanent access way because it wasn't in the terms of reference. And they actually said that. And they said they were so uncomfortable, they said, well, crikey, we'll hand this over to the council. We'll get them to vote on it. Because they will be taken to the, for a judicial review if they start overruling and saying access must be off the main road forever. So the only answer is access off the main road. It's the only way. Even the EPA said that. Thank you. Oh, and I'll just go on. You're also putting that road across a green belt, a natural green belt. We're fighting to get green belts between developments in Old Taki. We've just got a sprawl happening, one subdivision after the other. Green belts, and we actually had that in our workshops. It's in the long-term plan, it's mentioned, and you're just wrecking it. There's a row of trees there, they're going to be wiped out, there's a watercourse there, the whole environment is suffering from it. The playground wasn't taken into consideration in 2006 or 2008. That's an environmental and social misfit there for the using Moy Place. The road reports, well, the one of them says that when connected up to further subdivisions, the effects will be more than minor in Moy Place. And I think you've got to look to the future. Any resource consent nowadays has to allow for, further developments that link in. Although there will be a road report then, it will be, it will be massaged to suit. And we're finding this more and more. And the environment suffers, the living environment suffers. So really, the EPA have actually said that it's a dumb access through their, through Moy Place because it wasn't on the terms of reference to come off State Highway number 1. Oh, sorry, the main road. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Sophie?
Kia ora, hopefully you can hear me okay. Yay, awesome. I'll keep it brief. I agree with what Liz and Councillor Halliday and Councillor Coe have shared, and also yourself, Mayor Holbrook. Just feeling like we're really between a rock and a hard place here, and it's a tough decision. And yeah, I also kind of don't see. I would have liked to have taken another couple of weeks just to fully understand the extent to which we don't have any other options. But it's like, as Councillor Crowe mentioned, it sounds like that has already been confirmed multiple times today. So I'm kind of the mind that we do just need to make the decision to designate. And yeah, so happy to support the recommendations today. I do really, really feel though, like we have to find some way of honouring the residents' concerns, and also concerns that I feel deeply too about the safety of that playground specifically. And so many of the residents concerned about the fact that when their grandchildren or people in the community come out and use the playground, that they want that to be a safe place. And so we have to think really intentionally about safety of the playground and also traffic calming measures and the like for that road to make sure that that those concerns, which are very, very valid, are respected and reflected also in the way that this new community adjoins what is an already really tight-knit community, as we've seen through this process. So I just acknowledge the residents, and yeah, it's not an easy decision or one that feels very nice to be making, but I think it kind of does feel like the only option we have available to us, and yeah, the reports point to that. So happy to support. Well, not happy, but
None
I
of
will
us
support.
happy.
Yeah.
Begrudgingly supporting. Any further comments? I said most of what I had to say
Sorry,
during.
Janet, can I just make a quick comment? Because I was absent. Apparently there was a vote about stalling this out. The only reason I couldn't vote is
What?
because I'd been locked out on Zoom.
Well, that's a
It's-
moot point. The only people who are in the room can vote.
No,
Sorry about
no,
that.
you can vote when you're on Zoom.
Yeah.
But
People,
the chair
people
had-
in the room or in the Zoom room.
Yeah, but the chair had locked me out of
That-
Zoom.
that-
That's why I couldn't get into it.
Okay,
Just
well.
let the
okay,
record
Okay.
show
well,
that. That's why I didn't vote, because I wasn't able to. I would have
Nobody
otherwise.
intentionally locked you out of a Zoom room. Good to have you here now. I honestly think it won't make any difference. We have all the information we need to make this decision today. At the start of today, I was wanting to adjourn it for a couple of weeks, but after that session we had this morning where we had robust question and answers, we got a good understanding of where we are in the process. We heard directly from the developer that a mediation with residents is not going to achieve an access off the main road. There's really no point in deferring it. And we need to be making decisions when we have the information to make the decision. So in terms of the engagement, that was a little bit hamstrung by the fast track process. I think we shouldn't forget that partly this is to do with the fast track process. In fact, in light of the comments about there being a viable alternative, we've heard today that there isn't a viable alternative. That the developers will be using this access way, or else they go right to the start of the process again. They can't just switch now and use the other process. If it were as simple as that, those of us who are voting for this today would be voting against. None of us want to do this, right? But we've heard the information, we know where we are in the process. The panel who made the decision factored in all the information. Somebody said that some information wasn't factored in. All that has been decided through a resource consent process. We're not a resource consent panel here. We're a council deciding on the status of a road reserve. So with that, I'll put this to the vote. All in favour? Aye. Against? All in favour, put up your hands.
All in favour.
Thank you. All in favour? Your Worship. Councillor Halliday, Councillor Coe, Councillor Spires, online, Councillor Handford. Are those against? Councillor Warwick, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Coford. One second, I've got to find my spots. Against? Deputy Mayor Kirby. And online,
Councillor Pravanov.
Councillor Pravanov. Against.
Okay, that has not passed.
It's defeated.
Yeah. Okay, I'll stay, Lawrence. So we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is adoption of dangerous, affected and insanitary buildings policy 2024. Eleven point five, adoption of dangerous, affected and insanitary buildings policy 2024, page 54. Right,
Oh,
take it away,
sorry.
Hamish.
Kia ora koutou, everybody. We're here this afternoon to talk about and table for your consideration final draft Dangerous, Affected and Insanitary Buildings Policy 2024. Just a little bit of background as a very quick synopsis. We're required to have this policy under the Building Act and for it to be reviewed every 5 years as a building control authority. The early review of the policy, we received feedback from MB, which we reflected into a draft which we brought forward for agreement to consult, which was undertaken over the September-October period for a month. We received 12 submissions on the proposed draft policy, and one submitted was heard on the 31st of October from memory to speak to their submission. Subsequent to that, we've identified a number of minor technical changes reflecting some of the points identified in those submissions, and we've attached the substantive final draft bylaw today for your consideration for adoption, and happy to take the report as read and take any questions through you, Madam Chair.
Okay, any questions?
Yep.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Hamish. Just under the heritage buildings not being given automatic dispensation, how does that run with Heritage New Zealand? Are we likely to run into issues there? So the people who declare buildings to be heritage buildings and put that status on them, are we able to, because under this, if we declare that as an insanitary building, we could then put the bulldozer through it, but wouldn't historic places or people like that have an issue with that? I'm just wondering if that runs counter to them, that's all.
How's that with historic buildings?
Basically, the requirement is that we would have to consult with the Historic Places Trust and reach a consensus with them about how the problem would be remedied with the least effect on the building's historic values.
And my other question is, when it comes to, say, marae buildings or mana whenua buildings, does this apply, or is there a separate? Yeah, so how does that apply? Like, council wouldn't go onto a marae and go, well, that shed looks like it's fallen down and it's insanitary. How does that work?
Under the policy, we investigate if we receive complaints or concerns about a building. If we did, we would investigate. Same with the Historic Places Trust situation. If there was an issue, then we are bound to have to work with the owners to find a suitable solution. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Oh, just one question, Madam
Yeah,
Chair,
sure.
sorry. Just with regard to buildings at risk, some buildings, I think they still have a placard on them saying enter at your own risk. That doesn't carry weight in tort, does it? You can't say people keep out if this falls on you, it's your fault.
My understanding, and perhaps Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but if a council puts a notice to restricting entry to a building, then that does have force, and we can stop people from doing so. We can barricade the building in order for them not to be able to get in.
Oh,
Steve might be
this
able to answer
relates
more.
to a hall or something where there's a performance going on and it says enter at your own risk. Do you still have those placards?
I'm just going to chip in. So this is where we issue a notice,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So if council hasn't issued a notice,
Yeah.
the bylaw doesn't apply.
Right.
We deem something dangerous or insanitary, we put a notice on it, we stop entry.
Okay. Prohibited.
Very different, I think, to what
Yeah.
I think Councillor Cofford. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. So would somebody be willing to move the recommendations? Moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Warwick. Right of introduction. Waived. Any debate? All in favour? Aye. That's carried. Confirmation of minutes. Page 69. Thank you, guys. So we've got some minutes starting on page 69. Rather, the recommendation is on page 69, the minutes of the 31st of October. Can I have a mover for those? Moved by Councillor Kirby, seconded from the chair. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, that's carried. That takes us to the end of our meeting. Kia tōna manakitanga ki runga I a tātou katoa, kia hua ai ki te mā ki hiki hia ki ana, te toi te kupu, te toi te reo, kia toi te wairua, kia tau te mauri, ki roto I a mātou mahi katoa I tēnei rā, haumea hui, tākie. Thank you, everybody.